Josh founded the EHAB startup project in 2015. It has since taken on several iterations as the team has pursued a lean methodology to test and prove out assumptions about improving and changing the construction industry. Josh has led a diverse group of employees and contractors over this time, helping build the products and sell them. One project, the Weather Ledger, is aimed at helping the construction industry adapt to the effects of the climate crisis by automating weather compensation events and minimizing disputes. So I'm sure you'll hear that in more detail in a moment.
Amazing. Yeah, thanks, Leo. So yeah, it's been a really amazing journey with EHAB, and we've gone through lots of different developments and often testing lots of different sort of technology, blockchain and smart contract pilots and things like that. So it's been a really exciting journey to come from where we were to where we are now with the Weather Ledger, which is, you know, really, really exciting. I'm gonna give a much more sort of commercial and business point of view to the Weather Ledger, and then Keerthi Thomas, when he joins, will give a bit more of a technical overview. But I think it's important to talk about the commercial side of things, because ultimately that's how things get adopted. So as we were just hearing, bad weather is clearly something that impacts construction. Obviously, it's something that impacts construction companies around the world, and it's likely to have an ongoing and larger impact as the years go by. But it's also something that can't really be attributed to anyone. It's a totally neutral event, and so given that, that's part of the reason why contracts are a way to distribute the risk of that weather event, because in some cases it might be fair for the contractor to be given all the risk, but in some cases it might be fairer to have that risk balanced, because ultimately, you know, a careful balance of risk is what's going to make a project successful. So it's not just always about pushing the risk to one person if they aren't able to deal with that. And again, this is quite an obvious statement, but I'm just sort of laying the groundwork. And as David was saying, there's different ways that you can write up a contract to share that risk. So within the NEC, for example, which is the suite of contracts that we're trying to replicate and demonstrate with at the moment, they use a 1 in 10 year threshold for how that risk is attributed. So if a weather event is less frequent than 1 in 10 years, then that risk remains with the contractor. And if that weather event is above a 1 in 10 year threshold, then that risk will be the client's. Within the JCT, they use a different mechanism, a different threshold. And as you can see, it's a lot less clear what that threshold actually is, because it's simply using some legal words to describe what that threshold is. So the NEC seems like a really good place to start in terms of the language that it uses for the distribution of that risk, and obviously turning that into a smart contract and something that actually automates and operates that clause. And again, as David said, it's right now, the process is pretty prone to human error. So even though the NEC says that a 1 in 10 year event, anything above that is the client's risk, that still doesn't mean that every single time a weather event occurs, that is going to result in a compensation event or even the outcome that either of the parties were expecting, because ultimately both of those sides have a vested interest in it not going the other's way if it is something around that area. So the mission that we set out with the Weather Ledger project was to try to create and design a system which reduces the amount of human input, error, that goes into this process. And the way that we thought it made sense to do that was using some IoT sensors and a distributed ledger to try to weave together a process which is, as I said, more automated and less likely to have the biases of humans influencing it. And again, it's been a really awesome journey to be working with so many fantastic partners. So yeah, obviously Clyde & Co, you can see there, Digital Catapult, who Keerthi is coming from. But yeah, without all of the players on that screen, especially the industry partners helping us in terms of what it should look like, then we wouldn't be where we are. So we only started in April, but it's we've been learning just a huge amount in this time period. So I'll really briefly highlight the steps in the system, which Keerthi will go into a bit more detail later. But step one is we at the moment, the data is basically captured from loads of different places. People might be on site trying to get some information. They'll sort of stick their finger in the air and say, yeah, it's probably been quite rainy this month, so maybe we should go to the Met Office to request some data. The process is not very data driven. It's quite ad hoc. And so we said, okay, let's put a device on site which captures the actual weather at that location. Because even when at the moment they might ask for some data from the Met Office, the Met Office does not have 100% coverage of the UK. So in one site we looked at, the weather station was actually 40 miles away or something. And that's quite frequent, that there will be many miles between the site and the closest Met Office weather station. So step one, we've put a machine onto site, and we currently have 5 sites with which we're testing on. That data is then ported into a distributed ledger, which at the moment is just running on our own servers, but we're soon going to be getting it up and running on the servers of all of the contractors, potentially of Digital Catapult and Clyde & Co as well, to demonstrate, the shared nature of that information and the inability for anyone to tamper with that information. And so you can consider the information in that DLT the quote unquote source of truth for that site in regards to obviously the metrics that are being captured by that weather station. And I'll go into a little bit more detail in a second about some of the challenges around the actual commercial side of that. Again, as Keerthi will explain in more detail later, we've then written smart contracts which watch this database and reflect the language that is found in the NEC. So one specific part of the NEC is if there is a greater number of days, if there are a certain number of days with rain over 5 millimeters, then that is a compensation event if that number of days is over a 1 in 10 year. So we have to calculate what the 1 in 10 year value is, looking at historical information. We then have to obviously monitor that DLT. If that threshold is broken, then we can assume, or we can issue a notice, which basically says, yes, this is a compensatable event. That doesn't automatically mean that some money will change hands, but what it is doing is helping the parties come to a common understanding of that event happening, whereas at the moment that isn't the case. And yeah, as I mentioned, we aren't able to automate the entirety of this clause because it's several steps that usually have to be undertaken. But what we can do is really, really significantly reduce the admin associated with that. We can obviously provide them with much better data, more accurate data than is being captured at the moment. And in theory, in the future, depending on the agreements that can be arrived at between the various parties, then they could automate further steps as well. And so right now the system is built and we're testing it, and the technology side of things is going very, very well. Obviously, there's always with these kinds of things kinks to iron out, but then none of these challenges are insurmountable. The real things that are sort of boggling my mind at the moment are the sort of the cultural and commercial aspects of this, because clearly, if we release this onto the market next year, as we plan to, it will be a first of its kind within the construction sector, which is a fantastic thing. But that's also a challenge in and of itself for the two reasons that I've just shown there. So in terms of the cultural side of things, there is an inherent, or over many years of working in the industry, there seems to be this culture of argumentativeness and the desire to negotiate, which, yeah, I'm sure David can give many stories about, where the client and the contractor don't necessarily, although they may have agreed up front to a 1 in 10 year event in the NEC, that may not actually come to pass in reality. And so you end up with this thing of people agreeing to a contract up front, but then they still debate and discuss at every step of the way because they're fighting for their own interests. So there are clear benefits of automating lots of these things, but it does really take a shift in mindset as to realize that, yes, you're letting go the control of this decision to a machine, but what that does do is means you save a lot of time and a lot of money in that process. So you cede the perception of some control, but it saves you a lot of time and money. And I think the way that we're solving that is having some long, really interesting discussions with clients and contractors and getting them to recognize and start to understand that this is something that works, but it's only something that works if we all agree that it works, and we all agree that we're going to implement this. Because as soon as one party sort of questions something, then it makes it harder to actually make that work. And the other piece is commercial. So right now, and as we've been going through this discovery process, it's very hard to find any data about any of the things that the construction industry is doing. It's a real cliche, but they're not. There's so much information out there, but there's no data. So there's anecdotal quotes from people saying, this is the issue, this is the issue, this is the issue, but it's very hard to quantify that. And so what by this I kind of mean, like there's no baseline that we can measure ourselves against, because that simply isn't captured at the moment. And so from a commercial perspective, when you're talking with decision makers in organizations and saying smart contracts are the future, they can have this benefit, that benefit, obviously the sensible and traditional response is, okay, that sounds great, but what is the return on my investment for this? And so it's going to take significant effort and time to get the pilots, to get the case studies, to illustrate that this is something that has that that commercial viability that, of course, every solution needs. I'm very confident that we can get there, and obviously these pilots are exactly the right thing that we need to be doing to prove that. But it's not easy, is what I'm saying. And I guess the sort of the thing that I'll leave this talk on a little bit is that we don't call ourselves a smart contract company or a blockchain company, because ultimately we recognize that this is an ongoing and maturing market, one that has so much exciting potential, as David's already highlighted. But equally, it's we don't want to rest on our laurels and have to wait for the industry to decide that smart contracts can and will be the future. So rather than being a smart contract startup, we're a risk management startup, and our tool has 3 different elements to it. Smart contracts clearly is a fundamental part of that, just as the contract is a fundamental risk management tool for construction companies. But we would be stupid in saying that there weren't other elements that companies turn to try to manage their risk. So I won't go into detail, but the enhanced planning tool uses some of that exact same information and data that is within the smart contract tool to help them make better planning decisions, so they can actually avoid some of the risk in their schedule altogether, so they don't have to have these potential events occurring. And the really interesting part that we're excited by is the parametric insurance side of things, because whilst with this weather ledger, we're creating a smart contract which represents the NEC or a version of the NEC. with the parametric insurance, we're going to be creating a smart policy. So using the same smart contract, using the same DLT, which has the source of truth for that site, we can offer risk transfer solutions to those parties on site and help them sort of basically expedite some of the cost that does in fact occur when a delay or damage occurs because of a weather event. And again, because it's all done through the DLT and a range of smart contracts, it means that the claims handling process is massively reduced in admin. There's no burden of proof as to whether that event actually occurred. It's simply based on the weather event occurring. And so I think, again, it's going to take a cultural shift to start to realize that some of the ways that we could do things with smart contracts could actually really, really open up new opportunities in terms of changing the way we actually do things ever so slightly. So, not massive drastic changes to begin with, perhaps, but they offer better avenues for how things could be done. So yeah, we're so excited by what's been happening throughout the Weather Ledger project, and there's still lots of learning to do. But I would love to have a chat with anyone afterwards as well if they've got any questions, because more than happy to share about some of the challenges and some of the hurdles that we've had to overcome. So yeah, I'll finish up there, I think.